My name is Sarah. I'm 25 years old. Today, I want to share a story that has lived in my family for generations. A story my grandmother once told me, something she herself went through inside our ancestral home. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Now, let me take you back to the night when the hidden secret of Blackwood Manor was first revealed. The first time I saw Blackwood Manor again, I could barely recognize it. What once stood as a symbol of my family's power and prestige had decayed into something closer to a mausoleum than a home. The sprawling estate, with its cracked stone walls and ivy strangling the windows, looked like it was holding its breath, as though waiting for someone to finally pronounce it dead. Its once white pillars were now stained grey, its grand front doors warped and splintering under years of neglect. Every creak of the wooden steps as I climbed them whispered a truth we all tried to ignore. This house, like our family, was rotting from the inside out. I paused at the threshold, fingers grazing the cold brass handle. My reflection in its dull sheen felt ghostly, almost like the house itself was mocking me. "You don't belong here," it seemed to say. And maybe it was right. The legacy of the Blackwoods was a heavy thing to inherit, especially when you knew the stories, the scandals whispered about in town, the feuds that split bloodlines, the debts that quietly mounted until the family fortune was nothing more than a memory. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog, and the scent of mildew clung to everything. The grand chandelier, once sparkling with 100 crystals, sagged low and dim, its light bulbs long gone. A faded portrait of my great-grandfather glared at me from the wall, his stern eyes following me the way they used to when I was a child. His presence seemed to echo a silent judgment. "We built this empire, and you let it fall apart." I wasn't alone, of course. My cousins were already gathered in the parlor, the voices hushed, strained with the kind of tension that comes from people who share blood but not trust. Eleanor, the eldest, sat stiff-backed on the dusty sofa, clutching a leather handbag as if it held her last shred of dignity. She had always believed she was the rightful heir to everything, despite the fact that none of us had seen a cent from the family coffers in years. Beside her stood Victor, her younger brother, pacing like a caged wolf, his impatience radiating with every sharp tap of his shoes against the warped floor. He had gambled away more than he owned, and we all knew he wasn't here for nostalgia, he was here for salvation. Then there was Clara, quiet and withdrawn, standing by the window with her arms crossed. She had been the closest thing I had to a sister when we were children, but years of unspoken resentment hung between us like a locked door. She refused to meet my eyes, and I didn't push it. Not yet. And finally, Uncle Richard, the last of the older generation, sat slouched in an armchair, nursing a glass of whiskey as though it might drown his regrets. His hair, once thick and black, was now a brittle grey. His eyes were bloodshot, but sharp, always calculating. He had spent his life mismanaging what little remained of our fortune, and the rumors said he had mortgaged parts of the estate just to stay afloat. He didn't deny it. He never denied anything, which in some ways made him the most dangerous of all. We were all gathered here for one reason: desperation. The house was on the brink of being lost forever. Property taxes, repairs, and debts we couldn't pay had piled up like a noose around our necks. Selling the manor seemed inevitable, though the very thought made Eleanor's lips curl in disgust. "This house is our blood," she said earlier, "and we will not let it go to strangers." But her words rang hollow, because we all knew the truth. Sentiment didn't pay bills. As I looked around at their weary faces, I realized that Blackwood Manor was more than just a house. It was the last fragile thread tying us to a legacy we barely understood. Without it, we would scatter like leaves in the wind, strangers bound only by DNA and grudges. And maybe that was why none of us could quite walk away, even when logic screamed at us to cut our losses. That night, as the storm clouds gathered outside, we sat in the parlor, discussing what little options remained. The room smelled of damp wood and stale smoke, the fire long dead in the hearth. Eleanor insisted we find a buyer who would respect the history of the home. Victor argued that we should gut the place and sell it in pieces. The antiques, the land, even the bricks if need be. Clara said nothing, but I could see her hand tightening into a fist against her side. Uncle Richard, sipping slowly, muttered that perhaps there was more to the manor than we knew, some hidden salvation left by our ancestors. We laughed at first, assuming it was the whiskey talking, but deep down, none of us completely dismissed the idea. For Blackwood Manor had always been shrouded in whispers. Townsfolk told stories of secret rooms, of hidden safes behind walls, of letters locked away where no one dared to look. As children, we used to play treasure hunters, knocking on the paneling, listening for hollow sounds. We never found anything, but the thrill of mystery lingered. Now, faced with ruin, those childhood tales no longer seemed so far-fetched. When the rain began to hammer against the windows, I excused myself from the group and wandered the halls alone. My footsteps echoed through corridors lined with dust-covered mirrors and decaying tapestries. Every corner of the manor held memories, holidays by the fire, hushed arguments overheard through walls, moments of laughter that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The deeper I walked, the heavier the silence became, as though the house itself was listening. I stopped in the old library, my favorite room as a child. The shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten books, and cobwebs stretched between them like delicate scars. I ran my hand along the spines, feeling the rough texture of leather worn thin by time. That's when I noticed it. The floor beneath me gave the faintest creak, different from the others. A hollow sound. I froze, my breath catching. It could have been nothing, just the whim of old wood. But in that moment, a strange certainty took hold. Something was there, waiting to be found. And as the storm raged outside and the family argued in the parlor, I couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwood Manor still had secrets left to tell. Secrets that could either save us, or finally bury the Blackwood legacy for good. The storm had not relented through the night. Thunder rolled across the hills, rattling the windows of Blackwood Manor like a warning drum. Rainwater streaked down the cracked panes, blurring the outside world into nothing but shifting shadows. Inside, the air was heavy, damp with mildew, thick with unspoken tension. The family had finally retired to their separate rooms, unable to find common ground in the parlor arguments. I lay awake in the guest chamber, staring at the peeling ceiling, the sound of dripping water echoing somewhere deep in the house. But sleep never came. Instead, the hollow sound from the library floorboards haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind. It was subtle, easy to dismiss, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something. Blackwood Manor had always carried whispers of hidden compartments, of secrets buried within its walls. Maybe Uncle Richard's drunken suggestion hadn't been so foolish after all. Just after midnight, when the house had settled into silence, I lit a candle and crept back toward the library. My footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the warped floor, the flickering flame casting long, distorted shadows across the hall. Every portrait I passed seemed to glare down at me, the painted eyes filled with quiet condemnation. I ignored them. Something was calling me, and I intended to answer. The library door groaned open as I pushed it, the stale air rushing out like the breath of something long dead. The shelves loomed above me, rows of forgotten books slouching under their own weight. I moved to the spot I had noticed earlier, near the far wall where the floor creaked differently. Kneeling, I tapped the wood. Hollow. My pulse quickened. I set the candle down and felt along the planks, my fingers catching against a seam. With a careful tug, one of the boards shifted, revealing a narrow compartment hidden beneath. My heart pounded as I reached inside. At first, I felt only dust and splinters, but then, my hand closed around something firm, wrapped in brittle cloth. When I drew it out, my breath caught. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, the wax seal still intact despite the years. Pressed into the seal was the unmistakable crest of the Blackwood family, a raven clutching a key, the symbol etched into countless heirlooms and portraits. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. For a long moment, I just stayed, the candle flame trembling with the draught. What lay inside could be nothing more than a forgotten letter, or it could be the salvation we all needed. My hand shook as I broke the seal, the wax cracking like brittle bone. Inside was parchment, folded several times. The edges frayed, but the ink still surprisingly legible. The handwriting was elegant, formal, the style of a different century. At the top was a date, September 14th, 1821. My eyes widened. This was no recent note. It had been waiting here for more than 200 years. As I began to read, the candle flickered violently, and for a moment I thought the storm had extinguished it. But the flame held, illuminating the words that would change everything. To those who bear the name Blackwood, know that the inheritance of this house and all that rests upon its soil shall not pass freely to your hands. You must prove yourselves worthy, for wealth without honor is a curse. I set forth these conditions, not to burden, but to bind, to restore what has been broken, and to remind you that blood alone does not make family. The word struck me like a physical blow. This was not a will of simple distribution. It was a challenge, a test. My throat tightened as I continued. The first condition demanded that all direct descendants of the Blackwood line live in the manor for 1 full year. You shall endure as your forebears endured, without the indulgence of modern invention. Only then shall you understand the life that built this house. I pictured Eleanor and Victor stripped of their comforts, Clara trapped in these suffocating halls, Uncle Richard forced to survive without his whiskey deliveries. The idea seemed absurd, impossible. Yet the words carried a weight that could not be dismissed. The second condition was even stranger. You shall uncover the truths buried within these walls. I have set forth a series of signs, riddles, and tokens. Follow them well, for they shall reveal not only where treasure lies, but who you truly are. A scavenger hunt. My mind reeled at the thought of cryptic puzzles left behind by an ancestor long dead. It felt almost theatrical, like something from a Gothic novel, yet here it was in my trembling hands. Then came the final condition, the one that made my blood run cold. You shall reconcile with those of your kin whom you have cast aside. There shall be no inheritance unless those divided are made whole again, and the wounds of old are healed in the light of day. I stopped, staring at the words until they blurred. Reconciliation. Public reconciliation, no less, according to the final lines. The Blackwood feud had stretched across generations. Betrayals, lawsuits, whispered curses that split the family into branches that hadn't spoken in decades. Some wounds ran so deep they were almost part of our bloodline. To mend them now felt like asking the dead to forgive the living. I lowered the parchment, my hand trembling. The candlelight seemed to burn brighter against the storm shadows, as though the house itself was listening, waiting for my reaction. For years, we had thought our downfall was inevitable, that the debts and decay would erase us. Yet here, hidden beneath the floor, was proof that our ancestors had left a path, a twisted, difficult path, but perhaps a path to salvation. Behind me, the door creaked. My heart lurched, and I quickly pressed the parchment to my chest. Clara stood in the doorway, her face pale in the flickering light. Her eyes flicked from me to the opened floorboard, then to the envelope in my hand. You found something, she whispered. It wasn't a question. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to hide it, to claim the discovery as mine alone. But something in her gaze stopped me. For all our distance, Clara had always shared my curiosity, my love of the manor's mysteries. And perhaps, if the will demanded reconciliation, then secrecy was the first wall I would have to break. Wordlessly, I handed her the parchment. She unfolded it slowly, her lips moving as she read. I watched her expression shift. Skepticism, shock, disbelief, and finally a glimmer of something I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. Hope. When she looked back at me, the storm outside roared louder, lightning illuminating the shelves around us. She clutched the parchment tightly. The others need to see this, she said. I nodded, though dread coiled in my stomach. The revelation would not unite us easily. No, it would tear open every wound, expose every fracture. But the truth could not stay buried any longer. As we left the library, the house seemed to groan around us, almost alive. Blackwood Manor had given up one of its secrets, and demanded that we uncover the rest. The next morning, the storm had finally broken, leaving the manor draped in a suffocating silence. The air smelled of wet earth and decayed wood, every surface slick with moisture seeping through the cracks. We gathered in the parlor again, though none of us had truly slept. Clara and I had spent most of the night debating whether to reveal the testament immediately or to hold it back until we understood its full weight. In the end, secrecy felt impossible. The house itself seemed to demand the truth be spoken. Uncle Richard sat slouched in his chair, nacing another glass of whiskey despite the early hour. Eleanor perched at the edge of the sofa, spine rigid, eyes sharp with suspicion. Victor paced like a restless hound, muttering about debts and buyers. When Clara laid the brittle parchment on the table between us, the room stilled. "What is this?" Eleanor asked, her voice taut. "The will," Clara said simply. "The real will, hidden under the library floor." Richard leaned forward, squinting at the parchment with bleary eyes. "Impossible. That house has been combed through 100 times. You expect us to believe." "Read it," I interrupted, sliding it toward him. He hesitated, then adjusted his spectacles and began. His voice, though slurred, carried the archaic words with surprising clarity. With each sentence, the tension in the room thickened. When he reached the first condition, Eleanor gasped. "All descendants must reside within Blackwood Manor for no less than 1 year, shunning the indulgence of modern invention. In enduring as our forebears endured, you shall prove your worth to inherit." Victor barked a laugh, sharp and incredulous. "Live here? For a year? Without electricity, without heat, without, God forbid, Wi-Fi? That's insane." Eleanor's lips thinned. "It's barbaric. Surely no court would enforce such a thing." But even she couldn't tear her eyes away from the words. I could see the calculation flicker across her face. The estate, if preserved, was worth millions, far more than any of us could dream of outside these crumbling walls. To her, the cost of discomfort might not outweigh the promise of power. Richard cleared his throat and read on. "The second condition, you shall seek the truths I have concealed within these grounds. Signs and riddles shall guide you to relics of our past, for only by uncovering them shall you learn the weight of this name you bear." A scavenger hunt. Even hearing it aloud, it felt absurd, and yet something in my chest tightened, a flicker of excitement buried beneath the dread. I remembered the childhood games we played in these halls, knocking on paneling, listening for hollow sounds, pretending we were treasure hunters. Could our ancestors have planted real riddles? Real treasures? Victor's expression shifted from mockery to greed. "If there's treasure hidden here, then fine. I'll tear the damn place apart until I find it." Clara shot him a look of disgust. "It's not about money. It's about history. Don't you see? They wanted us to know who we are." But Richard raised a hand for silence, his voice gravelly as he read the final lines. "The third and final condition, those whose blood is divided shall be made whole again. No inheritance shall pass until those estranged reconcile before witness and kin. For only unity may preserve what greed and pride have broken." The room went cold. Eleanor's face blanched, and Victor stopped pacing altogether. Even Richard, usually unshaken, sat back heavily in his chair. The Blackwood feud was no simple quarrel. It was a wound centuries old, stretching across branches of the family tree like rot through wood. Our ancestors had betrayed one another over land, over business, over pride. In my own lifetime, I had watched my father refuse to speak to his brother, watched Eleanor spit venom at cousins she deemed unworthy, watched lawsuits filed and inheritances contested until the word family became nothing but a battlefield. And now this will demanded we not only speak to those we had cast aside, but publicly reconcile, apologize, forgive. It seemed more impossible than living in the house without electricity, more impossible than riddles hidden in the walls. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice ice. "This is madness. You cannot expect me to bow to people who dragged our name through filth in courtrooms." Victor sneered. "Reconcile. With those leeches? Never. I'd rather bane this place down. But Clara's voice, quiet yet steady, cut through the noise. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the real inheritance isn't the money or the house, it's us, learning to be more than what we've become. Her words hung in the air, heavy and unwelcome. No one wanted to admit she might be right. Richard finally set the parchment down, rubbing his temples. Whether you like it or not, these are the terms. If we want the estate, we obey. If we cannot, then Blackwood Manor dies with us. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear the rain dripping from the gutters outside, the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. For a moment, I felt as though the house itself was listening, holding its breath to see what we would decide. But there was no decision. Not yet. The conditions loomed over us like specters, unrealistic, unbearable, and yet binding. That night, as I lay awake once more, the words replayed in my head. 1 year in the house, stripped of modern comforts, riddles and secrets waiting to be unearthed. Public reconciliation with enemies who shared our blood. It felt less like an inheritance and more like a curse. And yet, deep in my chest, something stirred. A flicker of curiosity, a whisper of hope. If our ancestors had left these conditions, perhaps they had also left answers. Perhaps beneath the dust and decay, Blackwood Manor still had a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, listening to the silence. The will had spoken. The game had begun. The days that followed felt like stepping into another world, one where time moved slower, where every creak of the floorboards and whisper of wind through cracked windows carried meaning. The will had forced us together inside Blackwood Manor, and though none of us admitted it out loud, we were trapped not just by its conditions but by our own desperation. The first challenge, living without modern conveniences, was its own form of torture. The electricity had been shut off for months due to unpaid bills, and now we were forbidden from restoring it. Oil lamps cast dim halos of light, leaving shadows to swallow the corners of each room. We boiled water over the fireplace, cooked simple meals over fading embers. The manor groaned at night, every draught biting at our bones. Eleanor complained constantly, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence, while Victor grew more irritable by the hour, snapping at anyone who crossed him. But the second condition, the scavenger hunt of riddles, was where the real unraveling began. It started innocently enough. Clara found the first clue tucked inside a hollow of the grandfather clock. The parchment was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were clear. Seek where the raven guards the flame, and there you'll find the family shame. We argued for hours over its meaning until Eleanor, with a rare flash of insight, pointed toward the old study where carved ravens sat perched above the fireplace mantel. Hidden in the soot-stained bricks, we discovered a small tin box. Inside lay a bundle of letters, bound with frayed ribbon. The letters were addressed to my great-grandmother, Isabella Blackwood. They told of an affair, an illicit romance with a man outside the family's rigid social circle. Her words spoke of love, of longing, but also of betrayal when the affair ended in scandal. The Blackwoods had buried it, rewriting history to protect their reputation. Reading those letters aloud felt like trespassing, like stripping bare the ghosts of our past. Eleanor's face twisted with disgust, but Clara's eyes brimmed with something else, empathy. She was trapped, she whispered, like all of us. That was only the beginning. The next clue was found beneath a loose tile in the dining room. Beneath the feast of hollow kings, the truth of hunger always clings. We searched the grand dining table, carved with the faces of past patriarchs, until Victor pried open a hidden drawer. Inside was a journal belonging to our great-uncle Thomas. The entries revealed that during the Great Depression, while the Blackwoods flaunted wealth and hosted extravagant dinners, the workers on their land starved. Thomas had begged his father to share resources, but his pleas were denied. The shame of that choice had never been spoken of, until now. Each revelation cut deeper than the last. We found diaries in hollow walls, confessions scrawled on parchment hidden inside bedposts, even a rusted key sewn into the lining of an old coat. Each discovery painted a darker picture of our lineage: embezzlement, betrayals, children born in secrecy and erased from records. The Blackwoods, once hailed as pillars of dignity, were anything but. With every secret unearthed, arguments erupted. Eleanor insisted the past was irrelevant. May doubt dug up to tarnish their image. Victor saw only opportunity. He muttered constantly about selling artifacts to collectors. Richard grew quieter, his whiskey untouched for the first time in years, as if each discovery was a mirror held up to his own failures. But Clara embraced the truth. She read every letter, every diary entry, with a reverence that unsettled me. "We needed to see this," she told me one night as we sat by the dwindling fire. "We needed to know that we're not saints. We're human. And maybe that's what the will was trying to teach us." I wanted to believe her, yet part of me wondered if the house itself was testing us, feeding on our unraveling. The most devastating discovery came in the attic. The clue had been hidden inside a cracked portrait frame. Above the forgotten faces, where dust hides tears, lies the wound that never heals. The attic was suffocating, thick with dust and the smell of decay. We sifted through boxes of moth-eaten clothes and broken furniture until Clara unearthed a trunk locked with rusted iron. The key we had found days earlier fit perfectly. Inside were court documents, records of a lawsuit buried from family law. It revealed that my grandfather had cheated his own brother out of his inheritance, forging documents to seize the estate entirely. The betrayal had split the Blackwoods into warring branches, the very feud that still poisoned us today. When Eleanor read the documents, her hands trembled, but her voice was venom. Lies. Forged lies. Yet even she couldn't deny the seal of the court, the signatures etched in black ink. Victor exploded, his anger spilling into the room. So our entire claim to this house was built on theft, on betrayal? And we're supposed to reconcile after this? Richard sat in silence, tears welling in his eyes for the first time I could remember. He whispered, almost to himself, "We were never meant to keep it. Not like this." The family fractured further with each discovery. We yelled, we accused, we threatened to walk away. But none of us did. The will's conditions bound us tighter than blood ever had. And yet, amidst the chaos, something began to shift. One evening, after a particularly vicious argument, Clara approached Eleanor with one of Isabella's letters in hand. "Read it," she urged. Reluctantly, Eleanor did, and for the first time, I saw her expression soften, just slightly. Perhaps she saw herself in Isabella's desperation, in the suffocating weight of expectation. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a crack in the armor. By the end of the month, the manor no longer felt like a house of walls. It felt like a house of voices, each secret demanding to be heard. We were no longer just heirs fighting for survival. We were unwilling archaeologists, digging up the bones of our family and being forced to confront what they meant. And though the discoveries tore us apart, they also bound us in a strange way. For the first time, we shared something more than resentment. We shared the truth. The winter months inside Blackwood Manor felt endless. Cold air seeped through every crack, the fires burned low, and our patience ran thinner than the blankets that failed to keep us warm. Yet somehow, in the darkness of those nights, something began to change. The conditions of the will had broken us down piece by piece, forcing us to confront truths we'd spent our lives denying. Each secret we uncovered was another wound reopened, another scar traced back to the beginning. But wounds, as painful as they are, have a way of healing once exposed to light. It started with small gestures. Eleanor, who had once treated Clara with silent disdain, began to share the cooking duties without complaint. I watched her fumble with a pot over the fire, her manicured hands blistering from the work, but she said nothing. Clara, in time, softened her sharpness, offering quiet words of encouragement instead of reproach. Victor, though still restless and bitter, surprised us one night when he returned from chopping firewood with more than we needed. He didn't say why he had done it, and none of us asked, but the act spoke louder than his usual cynicism. Even Uncle Richard, who had clung to his whiskey like a lifeline, began to ration it carefully, offering sips instead of gulps. It was the first time I'd ever seen him give instead of take. The scavenger hunt, once a source of conflict, became the one thing that united us. Each clue demanded cooperation. Each hidden compartment required more than one pair of hands. Where once we had argued over meanings, we now debated like a team, each insight building on the other until solutions emerged. For the first time, our voices blended instead of clashing. The final clue led us to the chapel, a forgotten room at the far end of the manor, its stained glass windows cracked but still catching shards of light. There, behind the altar, we discovered a chest bound with iron. Inside were the last relics of our ancestors, ledgers of debts repaid, records of reconciliations made, even apologies written but never sent. It was as though they had left us not only their sins but their attempts at redemption, preserved for us to witness. At the bottom of the chest lay a final letter. The parchment was fragile, but the ink remained bold. To my descendants, if you have come this far, then you have endured hardship as we endured, unearthed truth as we once buried, and stood side by side as we too often failed. The inheritance of Blackwood Manor is not gold, nor land, nor power. It is the choice to remain a family when every reason tells you to walk away. Take this house not as a prize, but as a promise. Keep it alive, and you keep us alive within you. The words struck us silent. For so long, we had thought the inheritance was wealth, a salvation from our debts. But the truth was simpler, and far heavier. The manor itself was the inheritance, but only if we could truly become a family within its walls. The third condition loomed over us still, reconciliation with the estranged branches of the Blackwoods. That, we knew, would not be easy. Generations of betrayal could not be mended with a single letter or polite apology. But something in the final message gave us courage. Eleanor, who had always been the most resistant, was the first to break. Perhaps, she said quietly, her voice stripped of its usual steel, we've been fighting the wrong battle all along. She looked at Clara then, not with disdain, but with something closer to recognition. We can't undo what was done, but maybe we can choose differently now. Victor scoffed at first, but even he could not deny the change in the room. He stared at the relics in the chest, his jaw tight, and finally muttered, if we're going to do this, we do it together. Otherwise, it's worthless. Uncle Richard, tears streaking his weathered face, nodded. It's time, he whispered. Time to end what our fathers began. And so, for the first time in memory, we reached out. Letters were written, calls made, invitations extended to those who had long been cut off. Some were met with silence, others with anger, but a few, just a few, responded with cautious willingness. Months later, on a spring morning when the air carried the scent of renewal, the estranged relatives arrived. They came hesitantly, their footsteps echoing on the cracked stone path as though they were approaching a battlefield. And in some ways, they were. But this time, there were no weapons, no lawsuits, no venom. Only weary faces and hearts carrying the same burden of history. The reconciliation was not dramatic. There were no tearful embraces or sudden absolutions. Instead, it was awkward, halting, words spoken through clenched teeth, apologies half-formed, silences longer than sentences. But it was a beginning, and perhaps that was what mattered most. When the moment came to stand together, to publicly reconcile as the will demanded, we did so in the chapel where we had found the final letter. Sunlight broke through the cracked stained glass, scattering colors across our faces as we stood shoulder to shoulder. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And in that fragile unity, something shifted. For the first time, Blackwood Manor felt alive again. The weeks that followed were filled with labor. We scrubbed walls, repaired roofs, restored rooms that had been abandoned for decades. Slowly, the house shed its skin of decay and revealed the beauty beneath. The chandeliers sparkled once more. The gardens bloomed with life. The halls echoed not with arguments but with laughter, hesitant at first, then growing louder. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of fire, I stood on the manor's front steps, looking out over the land. Clara joined me, her hand brushing mine. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked. I thought of the secrets we had uncovered, the wounds we had exposed, the fragile bridges we had begun to build. "It's not about enough," I said. "It's about choosing to keep going. That's what family means." She smiled faintly, and for the first time, I believed we might actually succeed. Blackwood Manor still stood, not as a relic of pride and greed, but as a living testament to survival, to forgiveness, to the possibility of change. The true inheritance was never the wealth. It was the choice to stay, to endure, to define family not by blood alone, but by the bonds we chose to mend. And as the last rays of sunlight touched the manor's walls, I felt it, not just hope, but peace. The legacy of the Blackwoods was no longer fading. It was being rewritten.